Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 7th of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm Charles Malet. I'm very pleased to be joined by Brian Gerrish in the studio today and Vanessa Beeley remotely from Damascus. Now, today we're going to start with an extension of the analysis of the violence we're seeing across the United Kingdom, which Brian is going to deal with for us.
Indeed. And before I do, I'll just say we're wearing very similar shirts. For any of our viewers that have noticed, we are similarly dressed. This is an accidental occurrence. There we are, before those emails come in. Well, let's get on to the serious stuff. And I wanted to focus on some of the commentary that's now being pushed at the public about the recent events of riots and violence on the streets. And I'm going to focus with Nigel Farage, as man I've known of for a great many years. So let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Well, it's been a pretty appalling couple of days. Violence on the streets of this country that we haven't seen for a very long time. Yes, we had the riots in 2011, which were exercises in mass looting, but this is very, very different. Let's be clear. Thugs setting fire to hotels, migrant hotels with people in them, is just wrong at every level. I understand the frustrations, I understand the anger that is felt by huge numbers of people, but I do not support street protest, violence or thuggery in any way. And that's why for 30 years I've fought elections, because I believe that democracy is the peaceful way to solve problems.
Well, I'm going to say straight off, I absolutely agree with him with the view that we shouldn't be supporting violence on the streets, whatever side is using that violence. It is simply not acceptable. But my immediate criticism with Nigel Farage is he's talking democracy when we do not live in a democracy. And this is one of the key issues where he is not giving the public the true facts about what's really happening. Let's listen to a little bit more of this same video clip.
All this peace and love that we hear from those on the left simply isn't true. The Prime Minister has misread this completely and utterly. Just to call out the actions of the far right is to misunderstand two things. Firstly, let's be clear, there were masked Muslim extremist mobs, some with weapons, going around the streets of Midlands and northern cities, threatening journalists literally running away. Indeed, in some cases, people even having their tyres on their cars slashed. So, of course, as with every major conflict in life, there is fault, serious fault on both sides. But behind the extremes of both, what Starmer doesn't understand, and when he says, I'm going to stop the far right, what he doesn't understand is the general feeling of dissatisfaction that has been out there in this country growing for years. I talked in the general election about societal breakdown. What I meant by that were communities being split apart, people not even recognising the centres of some of our towns and cities as even being vaguely English anymore. And when it comes to the issue of two-tier policing, something which Keir Starmer denies, I promise you this perception began back at the time of Black Lives Matter. Remember? Churchill's statue being defaced, the cenotaph being abused in central London. And the police response? They knelt down in the street and took the knee to a Marxist organisation that wants to bring down Western civilization. And it goes on and on from there.
So let's just have a little think about what Nigel Farage had to say there. Complete agreement about the Muslim gangs. Completely wrong that their violence was on the street. So make no misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding about the opinion from UK Column about that. Totally agree with what he said. But then he starts to talk about the breakdown of society. And the key fault here is that he doesn't get to grips with the fact that the breakdown of society is the result of an orchestrated attack by a number of agencies on the democracy that he's talking about or claiming for UK. And once you get into the detail of this attack on communities, on democracy, it is totally unrealistic to believe that today in 2024, we live in a democracy in the United Kingdom. Something much more sinister has installed itself in the government. It is becoming increasingly dictatorial. And Charles, you in a minute are going to look at some of the challenges we face as laws are changed in order to clamp down on anyone who stands up to criticise what the government has done. He talks about policing, but policing has been under attack by a woke agenda. This has not been accidental. This has come through the political party and it's come through the policing system itself. And then finally, he manages to talk about Black Lives Matter and recognises a Marxist component. This is where he's right, but he doesn't understand what he's talking about, because if he understood the Marxist attack that had been unleashed on this country, he would know that the dissatisfaction amongst the public had been created through deliberate, orchestrated breakdown of our system of democracy, government, policing, and institutions. But Nigel Farage just skips over these issues. It's as though the violence that's unfolded has simply been as a result of migration. And I absolutely challenge that. The violence is symptomatic of people understanding and sensing breakdown in their country, and politicians are responsible for this breakdown. In fact, they've even boasted of it, as did parliamentary candidate Danny Kruger. Let's listen to the last part of the talk by Nigel Farage.
Do we want to deal with the symptom that we're seeing today, or solve the problem? Dealing with the symptom will turn us into France, where these flare-ups, these racial tensions between the Muslim community and the French right flare up month after month, year after year, leaving big parts of Marseille and Paris effectively no-go zones. Is that what we want? Or do we want to actually solve the problem? And I believe we can solve the problem. We need to end mass immigration now, to send a message to people. We understand that a 10 million population increase has put massive pressure on people's lives. We need to deal with the young men, undocumented young males, crossing the English Channel. Just today we learn that the Labour government are going to close down the hotels, close down the RAF camps like Wethersfield and Scampton, close down, as we learned last week, the Bibby Stockholm. They're going to put all these people now into government and private rented accommodation. So if your kids are trying to buy a house, trying to rent a house, or trying to get onto a social housing list, they've now been put even further to the back of the queue. Do you think that is going to solve any of these tensions, any of these problems? I promise you that it won't. We have to be clear that whilst we've always been open to genuine refugees, no one that crosses the English Channel trafficked in a small dinghy will ever get refugee status. And thirdly, we absolutely need to get all the police chiefs around the whole of the United Kingdom together and to say to them, start policing even-handedly.
So let's pull apart that third section there, because do we need to stop the mass migration? Absolutely. Where did the mass migration come from? Well, the immigrants didn't fight their way ashore. The doors were opened and they were encouraged to come into this country in increasing numbers. Labour followed the policy, the Conservatives followed the policy, and now we've got Labour back in power, reaping the whirlwind of the policies that they put in place for Starmer, at least in the Blair era. So it's the numbers coming in, and I agree with Farage on this point. It needs to stop, but it didn't happen accidentally. It happened as a result of policies, and the people who are responsible for those policies are still in power and still pulling the strings of the government. This is why he uses the distracting argument that the immigrants are all coming in via rubber boats. This is complete nonsense. The number of people coming in by boats is a tiny fraction of the total numbers who are being invited in through the programmed, orchestrated government's policy to bring more people into the country. And why is the immigration there? Well, it's not for the best interests of the indigenous people in the UK. It's not for the best interests of the migrants who are coming in themselves. The policy has been to use migration as a weapon to break down the structure of UK. And the tension, of course, now has got to such a level that we've seen the violence unleashed on the streets. So the message from the UK column to our audience, wherever you are in UK, or the States or worldwide, the danger that we face is deliberate political policy which is attacking the members of individual nation states and the members of individual communities. And until that issue is dealt with, we are not going to solve problems of migration. This is an absolutely key point. I'm being pretty forceful about this today because too many people want to simply focus on the number of people in the country and the type of people in the country and say that is the cause of the problem. This is not the case. We have to look at who is causing the problem. Let's listen to somebody else stir the pot to help get this tension and aggression in the country to increase.
Tell me why you believe anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
So it's obvious that in all of history, anti-Semitism has been a shape-shifting virus. Sometimes people hated the Jews for their race. Sometimes they hated them for their religion. In this era, the only permissible way to hate the Jews is to hate them for having a state. And as I mentioned in the debate, this absolute obsession with the single Jewish state in the world, this way in which people who never turned out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad was killing 6 times the number of people who've died in every war involving Israel since 1948, when the Arab armies advanced. If you didn't come out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad killed 6 times that number of people in a decade, but you did turn out to attack Israel after October the 7th, you're an anti-Semite.
So this man, quite an eminent journalist, sits in the country and he's telling people in the country that we daren't criticise a foreign country that at the moment is embroiled in some pretty unpleasant violence and wars in the Middle East. We mustn't criticise it or he will accuse us of being anti-Semitic. So this is a direct attack on free speech and what people can think simply on the basis that, according to Mr. Murray, we mustn't dare criticise the government of Israel. So what else is in his head? Let's have a listen to how he would deal with the so-called immigration problem.
But clearly they've lost control of the streets. Now, is it time to send in the army at some point? Probably yes. But if the army will not be sent in, then the public will have to go in, and the public will have to sort this out themselves. And it'll be very, very brutal. I don't want them to live here. I don't want them here. They came under false pretenses. Many of them came illegally and continue to come illegally, and we don't want them here. And I'm perfectly willing to say that because it needs to be said. If I hated Australia, hated the Australian people, hated Australian history, hated the Australian way of life, broke into the country illegally and spent my time trying to undermine Australia, why should I be in Australia? Why? What would I have brought the country? What benefit? What moral benefit? What financial benefit? What social benefit? The answer is, you'd have brought no benefit. So why just hope that those people are not in large enough numbers and keep your fingers crossed and put it off for another day? I think we have to start saying very clearly, if you don't like it here, go. And if you don't like it here and you intend to make it worse, we will make you go. We stripped citizenship from ISIS members members of ISIS who, even if they had British citizenship, we stripped their passports. We need to start doing the same thing with Hamas. We have Hamas leaders in the UK, Hamas members in the UK. I'm calling on the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Attorney General, Prime Minister and others to start doing this, to start taking the passports away and deporting people who support Hamas in the UK.
Is there the willpower to listen?
I think that as the situation is changing, actually, I think there are things now able to be discussed and suggested, which were not able to be suggested or discussed even a few years ago.
Well, I've got to say, I find the supercilious arrogance of this man totally breathtaking. But when he's talking about a policy to kick out every immigrant in the country, whose policy is it? Is it his? Is it Israel? Is this the deep state? Is this a political agenda for the Labour Party or the Conservatives? The problem we have to deal with is who created the immigration problem. And once we've focused on that, we can start to see how we can correct what's actually happening in this country. So I'm going to say to the audience, think about the issues, think about who the real enemy is. Is it the people invited into the country, or is it the traitors who opened the door and without any consultation to the wider public of UK allowed hundreds of thousands, millions of people into the country? So I'm going to leave our audience to reflect on that, but a little later in the news, I'm going to be talking about J. Michael Waller, former CIA operative, talking about the maneuverings of the deep state in the US in order to interfere with freedoms of speech and political policy. It's serious stuff, Charles, and you're going to have a look here at the rules coming in to clamp down even further on anybody who stands up to challenge what's actually happening in UK.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Brian. Yes, in the last few weeks, we've spoken about the extension, really, of the definition of terrorism and what it may be seen to be encompassing, not forgetting, of course, that the original definition was really to do with the acts of government. So that's what we'll return to probably in a few minutes. But last week, I spoke about Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act, and I'd just like to make a clarification because I spoke specifically about the right to silence, which does exist under the Terrorism Act 2000, but not specifically under Schedule 7. And just as a demonstration of the breadth and the willingness of the UK column audience to help out and get involved, I've spoken to a former police officer with accreditation on the Schedule 7 side of things, which applies explicitly to ports within the UK. And it was a fascinating and enlightening conversation. But essentially, the bottom line is that if you are taken to one side under Schedule 7, then you are compelled to answer any question put to you. So I've got a slide to demonstrate the particular part of the Act here. So a person who's questioned under paragraph 203, basically meaning that if you're within the confines of a port, then you must give the examining officer any information in his possession which the officer requests. So you may also be asked for a passport or a photograph or an identity document, and also to declare whether you have any documents, but also to give the examining officer on request any document which he has with him and which is of a kind specified by the officer. So just, again, a further recap as to how somebody may be stopped under Schedule 7. And effectively, this applies, as I say, to ports. But the specific point here is that it's to determine whether or not that person is or has been concerned with the commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism. But of course, it's fairly wide net, and there doesn't need to be any specific element of suspicion to determine that. Now, statistically, we look at the Home Office provision from June of this year, and it's enlightening to see that of the 2,500 people that were pulled to one side under Schedule 7, at least 59% of those, 1,580 out of that 2,689 examinations, had biometric identifiers taken. Now, it's easy to see how this could be exploited, and I'm calling this biometric harvesting. So what they mean by that, biometric identifier includes photographs, fingerprints, and DNA samples. And last week I talked about this being a fishing expedition due to the fact that to question or examine somebody under Schedule 7 doesn't require any specific intelligence. But the 2,500 figure from the year to March of this year was a 96% decrease since the data was first collected in 2012, when a staggering 63,902 people were examined under Schedule 7. But still, the Home Office has the gall to say that there are a range of safeguards and measures in place to ensure appropriate use of the powers. But just to demonstrate how public scrutiny may affect itself in a positive sense, due to the increase in public scrutiny of the powers, there has been what they're calling a more targeted approach. Essentially, they've not been able to get away with what they were doing previously, which was just to pull anybody aside. And as I say, with the biometric harvesting in mind, this is very significant. But also, it's increased the rate of detention proportionally up to 65%, which has resulted in detention. Now, Keir Starmer spoke last week about police using existing powers and, of course, the unchecked rollout of facial recognition technology. Now, this is a slide from Liberty, which had what they're describing as a groundbreaking victory on a human rights basis to do with privacy back in 2020, but that's largely been completely forgotten and ignored. And of course, police have more and more powers to use facial recognition, and there's very little that seems to have been done to check it. So we'll just look at some of the potential pitfalls from the National Cyber Security Centre. It's actually going back some years. This was written in 2019. But of course, it tells us how biometrics are attacked. And the government are constantly insisting these technological advancements and platforms are invulnerable and they will keep us safe and secure. But the truth is always, or almost always, the opposite. So under biometric vulnerability, they say that all modalities are vulnerable, and the points at which the biometric system can be attacked and how they can be implemented are shown most obviously in what's called a presentation attack, which is basically an imposter using what's called an artifact to mimic an individual who has been enrolled in the system. So when we think back to what Schedule 7 enables, the collection of such data, so if a fingerprint of an enrolled individual is captured, or indeed for facial recognition, a portrait, then that could be used to create an artifact. And we hear about the cooperation of the individual. Well, of course, they're compelled to cooperate. And then without such cooperation, it can be much more challenging to obtain this. So the point of this is really just to state that in using such legislation, and Starmer was very clear that he wanted to, rather than create new laws, he wanted to use existing capabilities. And we see here how terrorism, in particular, the Terrorism Act and Schedule 7, is just another way in which biometric data is taken into a system. And of course, the other question is that the control of this, who is it that's designed these particular systems? Are they from within or without of this country? And indeed, where does the data go? That's one side of it. Of course, the other is, quite rightly, as they point out here, the vulnerability of it to anybody that's able to hack into any of these things. So it's not difficult to see how such data could be used against somebody that's been taken aside for a Schedule 7 examination.
Charles, thank you for that. So let's stress the situation here. As the violence goes up in UK, as people turn on each other, so the government can bring in more and more draconian controls, which ultimately are targeted each and every man, woman and child in this country. This is a police state. It's in power. It's now starting to show itself for what it really is. And the more people engage in protest against each other in communities or violence on the streets, the more this agenda is going to come in. So we're going to once again say immigration is a problem, of course. Should mass immigration be stopped? Absolutely. But this has to be stopped by targeting the root cause of the problem, which is political doctrine. Farage has mentioned the word Marxism. I would say a variant of Marxism, which has been unleashed through both the major political parties, both Labour and Conservatives. And people need to see this danger, because if they focus on attacking and getting annoyed with other members of the community of what colour, what race, then they are going to miss the point of what's really coming. This is very, very dangerous. And of course, the government, whether Conservative or Labour, is the same government which is happy to prosecute unlawful wars overseas, be it in Ukraine or in the Middle East. So, Vanessa, let's welcome you to UK Column. And I'm going to say, have you got any good news for the Middle East? I rather fear that the news is getting worse.
Yes, I mean, things are escalating. We were talking before I came on about the fact that here in Syria, particularly where we've been under an economic blockade that has basically stagnated society probably since 2018 until now, any kind of break in that stagnation is relatively welcome in a sense that it means things will eventually move forward despite the interim escalation, violence and pain. And of course, I also want to add, Brian, that immigration, yes, it's a problem, but when you mention the causes, of course, for me, the primary cause is our government's neo-colonialist agendas and foreign policy. In other words, the bombing and the pillaging of the global south, including West Asia, including Latin American countries, but particularly West Asia. So I think, we should probably talk about that a little bit more in extra. There's an awful lot going on in the region, so I've sort of tried to condense it as much as I can. So I'll sort of whiz through the facts, and I'm sure we can extrapolate a bit in extra. So last week we talked about the cause of the escalation, which is basically the double assassination of a Hezbollah senior commander, Ismail Haniyeh, who was the leader of the Hamas organization and also the chief negotiator with Israel over the release of the hostages in Gaza and any potential ceasefire. So that clearly shows how interested Israel is in bringing forth peace in Palestine. And then, of course, there was the US strike against the Iraqi PMF or PMU, the Popular Mobilization Forces, that actually comprise part of the Iraqi official military. Now, there has already been a degree of response from the resistance axis itself. Several US personnel were injured in the Iraq Ain al-Assad airbase attack, which, of course, you'll remember was also attacked after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandes in 2020 under the Trump administration. At the same time, and again, this is part of the regional maneuvers, US troops have actually returned to Kirkuk in Iraq. On the next slide, please, Brian. For the first time since 2020, reports are saying that basically they're there to occupy the oil-rich area of Kirkuk under the pretext of fighting ISIS. And yet again, that hypocrisy is demonstrated by the next slide, where in reality, the Kurdish Contras, who are basically controlled by Israel and the United States in northeast Syria, and there they are, of course, occupying and trading Syrian resources, including Syrian oil, released ISIS fighters, which is nothing more than another US proxy in the region, and therefore Iraq is increasing its security on the Syrian-Iraqi border. CENTCOM chief Michael Kurilla is in Israel for preparations against Iran and Hezbollah retaliation. And of course, that has included the movement of ships and troop carriers into the region. And the following map is just one of many that I found on social media. I can't sort of vouch for its accuracy, but it does at least demonstrate the hardware that the United States is moving into the area, both into the Red Sea, into the Gulf of Oman, into the Mediterranean. And of course, the UK has its basis on Cyprus, from which has been ferried multiple weapons and also NATO troops into northern Lebanon under the pretext of being able to evacuate citizens in the case of war. I'll leave the audience to interpret that as they wish. A very recent interview by Judge Napolitano with Alistair Crook, who's a former British diplomat who knows the region extremely well, worked in Israel, worked in the Middle East. Now, he makes the point that the US, while it denies any foreknowledge of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, he makes the point that, however, the ships that are now in, for example, the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, that didn't happen overnight. This was planned, and according to him, from the time or even before Netanyahu went to the state. So let's just have a quick listen of what he has to say.
But again, it's telling. I mean, you can't just supply these ships to order. I mean, they must have been given their orders and prepared and ready sometime before Netanyahu gave his speech. All these positions in place, and the head of CENTCOM is now sitting in the Middle East trying to bring together, if you like, an alliance of Arab air forces that will help the Americans to shoot down Iranian missiles again.
There have also been concerted efforts, not only by sort of what I would describe as US emissaries, including Jordan, that made an unprecedented visit to Tehran to try and persuade the Iranians not to respond to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. It's worth remembering, of course, that Jordan was responsible for the air defense for Israel in the previous Iranian retaliation after Israel bombed the embassy or the consulate in Damascus. And also worth noting that earlier this year, it had been discussed that NATO was to open an office in Jordan in its first official representation in the Middle East, which is another major move. And again, I just want to bring in Alistair Crook, where he talks about the fact that Israel should deal with the situation on their own.
The G7 pleading with Iran, oh, look, you mustn't do anything. You've got to restrain yourself. They never turn around and say to Israel, you ought to restrain yourself. It's not Iran that provoked this. You did this double assassination precisely into provoking a response from Iran. So you ought to be sorting it out, not asking all the rest of the West and America to come and assist us and help you with what you did it. You made your bed, you should lie in it.
Totally agree, but of course Israel is incapable of defending itself without the help of the US and the UK and its regional allies. There have been a number of theories circulating about what the response from the resistance axis will be. This is just one of them, a calculated simultaneous strike on Israel. And if we have a quick look at the text of the article, which is in the cradle on the next slide, please, Brian.
Okay. There we are.
Thank you. So they're saying, sorry, there's a really annoying fly. Retaliation is all but certain and could happen within hours, according to senior US officials. I think this report came out a couple of days ago. And of course, part of the response is this psychological warfare, Israel not knowing when the attack will come in, the panic and confusion among the settlers in the occupied territories. So basically what they're saying, Hezbollah General Secretary Hassan Nasrallah has promised a painful yet calculated blow to Tel Aviv, and so on. So basically this report is saying that the retaliation will be a combined retaliation. Other reports are saying, no, it will be, if you like, a tiered retaliation. So again, let's just listen to what Alistair Crook has to say about the preparation that Iran is making for the retaliation.
First of all, there's going to be no advance warning. Secondly, they're not going to be slow old drones. They're going to be high performance, smart missiles. And they're going to come from Iran. They're going to come from Hezbollah en masse, and they are going to come from the Houthis, and they are going to come from Iraq. I believe missiles have been pre-positioned. This is why we've been in a sort of period of some delay.
And last night, Syed Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, gave an hour-long or a bit more speech. And he basically said our response will come regardless of the consequences. So in other words, what the resistance axis is now saying, they understand that the war will escalate with this retaliation, but they can't keep absorbing Israel's provocations. What is Israeli media saying to some degree? I think it's trying to be a little bit hopeful on this. So on the next slide, basically this was taken from, I think it's the Times of Israel. If we can just move forward to the next slide. Iran may rethink Israel attacks plans amid intense US diplomatic efforts. There were other reports also saying that increased US presence in the area is going to deter Iran. I think that's highly unlikely. There has also been a lot of social media chatter about apparently Russia supplying weapons in a steady flow to Iran. In the last few days, that's actually been denied by high-level people in Iran itself. But of course, there is a defense agreement between Russia and Iran, and that's been demonstrated by Shoigu's visit in the last few days. And this is actually part of the retaliation. Hamas has announced Yahya al-Sinwar, the new Politburo chief, so to replace Ismail Haniyeh. Now, one of the reasons that Israel probably assassinated Ismail Haniyeh was that they wanted Khaled Mashal, who was formerly the external leader of Hamas, to replace him. Why? Because Khaled Mashal is, let's say, at least collaborative with the Zionist entity. And so therefore, the fact that actually Hamas has elected one of the more hardline leaders actually present with the military resistance factions in Gaza and probably at the top of the Israeli assassination list means basically that's sending a very strong message to Israel of the resistance unity, not only in Palestine, but also regionally.
Vanessa, what can we say? It's really terrible to listen. Your excellent reports, but it's really tough to listen to it because the violence is just escalating and escalating. I'm going to say to our audience, if the UK government under Keir Starmer, same under the Conservatives, can't call for peace in the Middle East or peace in Ukraine, I'm going to suggest it's very unlikely they are going to call for peace in this country because the fog of war and violence allows them to spread their power and influence as they wish without the public really being able to see what's going on. So we've got to be very vigilant about this. Now, can we say to the audience, if you like what the UK column is doing, then please do support us. It's that £5 a month membership which keeps us going. We want to grow and expand. And if you'd like to help us do that and you're not a member, please join and subscribe. Pass out the material. We are still not up on Facebook. This is a form of censorship, but communication doesn't seem to work. But please do share our material. And also you can help us by making a purchase from the shop. And the shop is not just for members. Anybody can come onto the website and make a purchase and help us continue doing what we're doing. I'm also going to say, if you're watching our news today and you haven't already got a copy of Your Life in Their Hands, the Agenda 21 booklet, please do consider buying one because we've had so many people tell us how really excellent it is. We are going to do more of these booklets on different subjects. The next one in the pipeline is on the King himself, the Green King, and we are working to be able to get these booklets sent overseas. Now, on the website is this interview, which is Diane McCaddy interviewing Craig Houston, and they're talking about Scottish politics. So particularly if you're north of the border, you might be interested in that one. And then this Thursday at 1 o'clock, we've got Clive de Carle talking to Nikita Stark about matters to do with health and in particular pregnancy and births. So health, an important issue for all of us. Have a look at that. And I think this is for you, Charles.
Yeah, we've got just a reminder that the Died Suddenly art exhibition in London, which will take place in November, is being run by Jake Fern. So it's concerning the excess deaths that we've experienced over the last few years. And if that's something you're interested in supporting or indeed providing information for, then please get in touch with Jake Fern, Jake H. Fern at yahoo.co.uk. And then also coming up next month, September, the 6th to the 7th of September, the Attack on Food and Farmers Symposium being hosted by Children's Health Defence with some excellent speakers at chd.tv/events. So do take a look at that because, of course, it is such a critical area of being attacked and to be able to look after our own lives.
Okay, thank you for that one. We've also got the Freedom Music 2024 Festival. That's coming up the 23rd to the 26th of August. Hope Sussex, Katie Joe leading that one, but some really good music. So 4-day family event, and you can find that online for more details. Also a reminder of the UK Columns on Location event at Bristol. Venue still to be announced, but I can assure you it's a quality venue. And we'll also be announcing some of the speakers in the next few days, so stay posted for that. And also it gives us pleasure to say to people, yes, there's peaceful protests planned, and this is Wednesday, the 4th of September at 12 o'clock in Parliament Square. Sleepwalking into a dictatorship, I couldn't agree more. So let's peacefully and lawfully unite against the selected, not elected, tyrannical, warmongering government. Bit of a mouthful there, but the sentiment is absolutely correct. Now, I'm going to come on to a very interesting person, J. Michael Waller. I did another interview with this man yesterday. He's a former CIA operative and he's a counterinsurgency expert. He was talking about what has been going on in protests in America. And let's just have a listen to this little 2-minute clip, and then I'll explain more as to what was in the interview itself.
And then you had agents provocateurs within the crowd. So as in any good crowd, if you want to create a good impression and you're organized for it, you'll have people dispersed in a diamond-shaped pattern. So they look like they're normal and they're spontaneous, but they're all issuing the same chants. And then they get the rest of the crowd to issue the same slogans and chants. So I could detect that crowd pattern as well as agents provocateurs. But they weren't just saying, say, patriotic slogans or pro-Trump slogans. They were saying really militant, provocative slogans to get people all riled up. So you could tell that those were the provocateurs. And then they were trying to lead ordinary people up toward the Capitol to go in and break the law and commit acts of violence.
Right. So without putting words in your mouth, Mike, these 4 groups, what were they? Are they sort of accidental provocateurs? I have to use that expression, coming from smaller groups who are better organized and wanted to take control? Or do you think that the nature of the 4 groups you identified tends to suggest there was a bigger, more professional controlling power that was targeting that crowd as a whole?
It seemed at the time, but it especially seems so in retrospect, that there was a larger controlling power that had its own people pre-positioned, but also had others who it was able to exploit. For example, the Oath Keepers. In that article, I referred to a column of men dressed in tactical gear coming through in one single regimented march, and some of them had Punisher skull patches on them as a unit identifier. Those were the Oath Keepers. And I had heard that at the time from others in the crowd, but I didn't put the name in the article because I didn't want to be, since that's an organization, I didn't want to defame an organization unless I knew for a fact that it was the Oath Keepers. But indeed, looking back at it now, it was, and some of them were tried and convicted. So that's an organized conservative and right-wing militia type group. So it's a legal organization. But what we later found was that the Oath Keeper leadership were FBI informants. So in this case, you have the FBI had penetrated and compromised the leadership of this group that attacked the United States Capitol, knowing in advance that it would do so. And no attempt was made to stop them from doing so. And indeed, every attempt was made to ensure that they succeeded. Now, so the FBI could have shut this down in a moment had it wanted to. And for some reason, the decision was made not to do it. That leads to the question, why?
Exactly.
If you're going to infiltrate a violent group,
yeah.
Pardon?
Well, exactly. That is the key question. So we're asking the question, why? What's your answer to who and why?
I don't know why. I have opinions about why, but really, why would the FBI do this?
So, Michael Waller, getting into the detail there of manipulation of the Capitol riots in America in 2021, all around, obviously, Trump at the time. But what he's talking about is government agencies, including the security agencies, manipulating the protest in order to turn it violent and also to entrap people into committing crimes that they wouldn't automatically do. Are the same policies being used here in UK? In my mind, absolutely yes. And we need to watch out for what's happening. But he was also warning about the what he calls the DEI agenda in the security services in America. If we can just pop this slide up on screen, please. And so what is he talking about here? That failures of the security services and the FBI itself as a result of essentially woke agendas being put in place. And the current acting head of the agency at the moment having to defend the agency against criticism that it's been this new agenda which has actually undermined the ability of the departments to function and indeed protect Trump at the rally. This is just pop this next one on screen. This is just an image from an article that Michael Waller wrote about what happened at the Capitol Hill attack, and also he's been giving lections about the political weaponization of the CIA. This is happening in America. It's happening in UK as well. And I'm going to say that the full interview talking about essentially the subversion of our Western democratic states and the security services. This interview will go out next Tuesday at 1 p.m. And the key topics there are Trump assassination attempt, DEI in the secret services, and more detail about the manipulation of the Capitol riots in 2021. So oppressive forces acting in America. Charles, you've got more here on what's planned for us in UK.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I referred earlier to what Keir Starmer said about using existing police powers, and we constantly hear the phrase, people are going to face the full force of the law. Now, what exactly does that mean? Who's saying it? And is there really any weight to it? So we'll just have a quick look at a tweet sent out by Diana Johnson. Here we go, retweeting the Home Office, prison sentences for rioting, violent disorder, inciting racial hatred and criminal damage. Now, this might seem a little bit petty, but since so much government business in the field of communications is put onto Twitter, I think looking at her Twitter profile bears a certain amount of scrutiny. She's got there in her bio the Ukrainian flag, a rainbow, which I'm fairly sure means something other than she just likes rainbows. But she goes on, as well as saying that she's the policing minister, she likes Yorkshire tea, cake, crime novels, black Labradors, and the colour red. So are we really to take such a person seriously? Now, another Twitter engagement from, this is Heidi Alexander, the Justice Minister, saying that all elements of the criminal justice system stand ready. But again, do they really? Because, of course, the prison service have been reporting for some time that they are effectively completely overwhelmed. And we talked about measures to try and ease this, letting out prisoners. We've just heard reference actually by Nigel Farage of former RAF Wethersfield, and this is the site which is currently used for asylum seekers. So we'll just have a quick look at this. The special development order that enabled the Home Office to be able to change the use from MOD property to Home Office property, but just to draw your attention to the fact that some of the documents have not been produced for security reasons, so we'll have to work off what has been. And we've got a fact sheet here. Why do we need large sites? And note the use of the passive tents. The number of people arriving in the UK who require accommodation has reached record levels and has put our asylum system under incredible strain, as though the Home Office could have absolutely no way in which to affect such strain or record levels. Also, I point out that it's costing £8 million a day. We go on to a little bit of site background. And again, interesting in the light of the current climate with defence, that it's surplus to defence requirements, telling, of course, in itself. And then why are they using the site? Well, at the moment, to support asylum seekers who would otherwise be destitute. So interesting, again, to highlight the discrepancy that the Home Office has a duty, apparently, to prevent asylum seekers becoming destitute, but not necessarily native British people who are at risk of homelessness. So that's sort of one side of it. But the main point here is that the speed with which the Home Office was able to requisition the area in order to repurpose it for asylum seekers is why the Telegraph article suggests that it could actually be used as a detention centre, or indeed other properties that are becoming available as part of the defence estate or elsewhere. Now, other measures that they have at their disposal leads us into what I'm going to refer to as pre-crime. I spoke last week about the serious violence reduction order here to do with knife crime, and effectively the situation is such. Based on previous criminal activity or indeed involvement with people who have undertaken criminal activity in relation to knife crime, you may have imposed upon you an order which means that you are either forbidden from doing things or mandated to do certain things, and it means you can be searched without suspicion. Now, this is one of a raft of powers that police have at their disposal. They're not new powers, as the Prime Minister says. He wants to continue to use existing powers, but of course it's very easy to forget, just because legislation hasn't yet necessarily had much use, that it isn't there lurking in the background. So this is just a selection: serious disruption prevention orders, the violent offender order, criminal behaviour orders, and serious crime prevention orders. Now, unfortunately, there's not enough time to go into exactly what form these all take. But as I say, the point of calling it pre-crime is that what they're doing is, rather than where a custodial sentence would effectively wipe the slate clean because the debt to society has been paid, these are talking about actions in which we're imagining that somebody is going to do something, carry out a future action based on their past behaviour. The other thing I should refer to, because we've concentrated on his case for the great part of the earlier bit of this year, is that of the political prisoner Sam Melia, who is in HMP Hull. And it's worth saying that I had a conversation with his wife Laura yesterday, and to talk about the manipulation of statistics. Yes, indeed, there may be space in the prisons, but from HMP Hull, 16 people were taken in recently as a result of violent disorder, which meant 6 people being released due to the governor's discretion. Sam, of course, himself being a political prisoner, again, there at the governor's discretion, is not going to be released. So again, very interesting to note that discrepancy. But in terms of other measures, the other person I'd like to bring in now is Lord Walney, who you'll consider in your mind, because I've spoken about him a lot. He's advising the government on countering extremism, and this is what he said to Times Radio recently about how to deal with violent disorder.
I think the British public will back further action from ministers in this emergency to get things under control. I think we should cast our mind back to the days of the days of COVID, where actually the public accepted an emergency situation during COVID and were prepared to back and and lawmakers were prepared to support the kind of temporary measures to ensure that basically rioters were not able to claim. Forgive me. Back in COVID, they were prepared to back measures that were needed in that situation. I think they would take a similar approach to keeping rioters off the streets now, given the scale of damage which is being done to communities.
No wonder he was stumbling over his words there. So he is in effect bringing to mind this notion that under an emergency, anything may be done. And that is quite the prospect. But also the other thing to consider with him is how impartial he may be regarded as being, particularly given the ethnic tensions that sort of underlie some of the violence in the UK at the moment. So I'll just show you his sort of profile from the Pinsker Centre, which organises trips for Oxbridge students out to the Middle East. And of course, they highlight the fact that during his time as an MP, Lord Walney served as the chair of the Labour Friends of Israel. So certainly not without bias. And also, I have to ask the question, is he now considered an extremist? This is the new definition which he's had some part in shaping. And the government tells us that it's an ideology that aims to negate or destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, and here he is suggesting lockdown again, or to undermine, overturn or replace the UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights, or intentionally create a permissive environment for others to achieve the results in one. So he is effectively setting the ball rolling, which is exactly what we saw during the period of COVID internment, when an idea was floated out there. It was deemed to be completely off the charts and that nobody would go for it. And then, of course, they did. And look what happened. So it'd be very interesting to see how this particularly develops over the next few weeks.
More dictatorial powers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's bring Vanessa back in, because despite Douglas Murray claiming that if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic, it appears that there are people in the Jewish community who are absolutely not happy with what's happening around them in their own country.
Yeah, and I also think he should remember that the Zionist project stole the land from Palestinians under false pretenses, and the 1947 mandate to partition Palestine is considered illegal. So coming back to the story that I covered last week of the anal rape of a Palestinian prisoner by, I think it was 9 Israeli military soldiers. And this was an article in Haaretz. So in Israeli media, the Seder Tayman doctor who saw the abused Gazan detainee said that he couldn't believe an Israeli prison guard could do such a thing. Basically, information obtained by Haaretz shows that the Gazan detainee suffered from a ruptured bowel, a severe injury to his anus, lung damage, and broken ribs. And he was taken to a hospital for treatment. Now, the video that we're going to show now was actually shown on Israeli media. It's not particularly graphic, so people don't need to worry about that. The quality is not great, and the translation from Hebrew to English, I think, has been done by AI, so I can't verify it. But I've seen a number of reports basically talking about what the video is saying. But it shows exactly what these soldiers did to this prisoner. The quality is not great, as I said, so you need to kind of peer at it. So let's play that.
Late in the evening, the firing camp shook. The Yemeni Hamas detainees are lying on the floor with their hands not covered. Here is a group of reserve soldiers from Hochma. A unit is used to secure the facility. They take the terrorist. Here they are, here in the corner of the facility. The The photo includes documentation of the crime attributed to the reserve men, a sodomy act among the causes of Enos. Hours later, the terrorist was taken to the hospital bleeding. His injuries were described as complex. The medical determination is unequivocal. The injuries were caused by the insertion of an object.
So I don't really need to interpret that opinion in Riots today. The tip of the iceberg, Israel cannot whitewash the horrific abuse of Palestinians by its soldiers. And also bearing in mind when we talk about hostages, there are now 9,000 estimated prisoners in Israeli jails just in the occupied territories. So I'm not including Gaza. So again, I want to come back to Alistair Crook. And I want to talk about this article that he's written for Strategic Culture. I recommend everybody reads it. So he talks about the 1948 Irgun Reborn. Irgun was actually one of the original Zionist terrorist groups that carried out the crimes like the bombing of Hotel Camp David, I think is the name. And he's talking about the return to this group, to Irgun, with the rise in the far-right extremism in Israel, controlled by the likes of Smotrich, the finance minister, and Ben-Gvir within Netanyahu's administration. And I find it very interesting what he talks about here. So he's talking about internal divisions potentially leading to an internal war in Israel itself. So let's just play this short clip.
So in a sense, what we saw there was, if you like, a foretaste of Israel going back to something most had thought it had left behind in 48, into militia. The militia, it was a militia, it was vigilante militia from the settlements who came down and stormed those two IDF bases. And the police could do nothing to stop them. And then the Knesset justified it all. So we may see something of this taking place, akin to a war, the members of the state of Judea descending down in order to fight the state of Israel. That's what it signaled. So really a key event, hardly noticed in much of the media, but really important, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Alistair on that. The internal divisions in Israel are increasing every single day. I mean, of course, you've got the riots and the protests about the inaction by Netanyahu's government, referenced the hostages, and of course, the assassination of the chief negotiator for the opposition or for Hamas doesn't imbue the faith that Netanyahu wants to get the hostages released. But this is also interesting. There have been major protests from the ultra-Orthodox Jews, the Haredi Jews in the occupied territories, who are saying, because of the recent law brought in by the Knesset, basically stating that they will be enlisted into the IDF, saying that they will die before enlisting. So if we just have a quick look at the actual report itself. So Israel released a statement on the 6th of August condemning the storming of a military base that day by ultra-Orthodox Jews, also known as the Haredim, who were protesting a recent government decision to enlist them into the Israeli army. Breaking into IDF bases is a grave offensive and against the law, the Israeli army said, adding that the enlistment of Haredi Jews into the military is a critical operational need, and we are determined to continue advancing it. Demonstrators from the ultra-Orthodox community stormed the Tel Hashameh base in Israel earlier on the 6th of August during a demonstration against compulsory conscription. Channel 12 News described the situation as out of control, with rioters outnumbering security forces and dozens breaking into the base. So, we are, in my opinion, seeing the state of Israel imploding. So what will come first, the resistance, retaliation, or Israel's self-immolation?
Yes, it's serious stuff. But of course, none of this is being reported, Vanessa, which is a great shame because we're just not told alternative opinions from within the Jewish community. And I believe I have mentioned to the UK column audience before, I've been trying to engage with the Jewish community in UK to talk about some of these issues. But even Jews that want to challenge their own government are frightened of speaking out. And I find this oppressive fear is very nasty. It's very pernicious. We should be able to speak freely about all sorts of topics because it's only by talking in the dialogue that we keep peace in sight. And that's what we need. Calm, peaceful reflection to sort out the problems that we face at the moment, and in particular the attacks. I'm just going to end on this one slide. I know we've overrun the news time a little bit, but I think this is important. There was a video circulating on social media showing a group of Muslims attacking a man at a pub, and that attack was pretty outrageous and horrible. However, the result of it was that people came forward from within that multi-ethnic, multicultural community to apologise and also to say, not in my name. And the comment from the lady who ran the local pub involved said that most were more sensible than not. And I think this is something for us to reflect on. If you're being sucked into the anger and the angst and the stress against another group of people, you are succumbing to the psychological warfare that's being unleashed against us. So stay calm, stay peaceful, stay talking to the man or woman next to you, because if we end up in the camps, we're not going to be bothered by the colour of anybody's skin next to us. It will be us versus the people with the key. So I'm going to end there. We're going to have UK Column Extra in a few minutes, and we will be doing some further analysis on some of these subjects. So if you're a UK Column Monthly member, please join us for that. Vanessa, thank you very much. Charles, thank you. We'll see everybody in extra time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.